Today's interview is with Andrew Thompson, who is an incredibly talented artist. He has done work with Reebok, he has done poster art for John Carpenter's The Thing, and he did cover art for Boom Comics' Magic the Gathering series, which is amazing. And he is just too cool to wait. So, cameraman was not able to make it into the studio this week. He had early onset diarrhea, which I'm told is not deadly, but can, really stink. So I figured instead of waiting, I would just take initiative, go up to the studio, and shoot myself, and I am glad that I did. So enjoy the interview with Andrew, coming up right now. So, thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so you have an interesting sort of evolution as to how you've gotten involved with Magic as a property. You are a very good Magic player, from what I have understand. But when did you start first playing, I guess?
So I first started playing, God, I had to have been like 12, 13. And it started out as just like four of my friends and I in our neighborhood in the summer, and we each had a color. So mine was red because I love dragons and I love chaos. And then I got into it a little bit more than they did, having played Yu-Gi-Oh! And played in tournaments for Yu-Gi-Oh! So I started buying the newer stuff and playing in like Type 2 at the time. And I would do F&M tournaments each week and didn't really do very well. And I think when I was like hooked on Magic was I think it was 2004, 2003 when Ravnica City of Guilds came out. That was the first booster box that I ever bought.
And what about that set made you get hooked? What was the particular like?
Do you want my joke answer or both?
Well, I mean both. Why not? I mean,
okay. My joke answer is Dimir Cut Purse. I love that card. It's my favorite. Like, I have two foil ones. They don't live in any commander decks I run because they're just not good. But
they're pet card, your pet card.
It's like such a pet card because it was, I had this deck that I made that was like a Sultai aggro, and it was all about like card manipulation. So I would try to keep my opponent's hand very small, and I would try to keep mine filled. So it was like get a Dimir Cut Purse out on turn 2, start hitting them, creating that like card advantage machine. And then had counters and kill spells to clear the way for the Cut Purse. And so that card will forever have a spot in my heart. The real answer is the art on Magic cards, because I grew up in Indianapolis, and Indy is home to Gen Con every summer. It's the biggest, 4 days in gaming for anybody who hasn't been. And I would just go with my dad. He would play Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournaments, and I would just spend hours in the artist alley. And I'd walk around with my friends. And one of my friends used to bully me because at the time I was really, really quiet and shy. And so I would carry a sketchbook with me pretty much everywhere. And we would just be talking to an artist, and my buddy Jay would just be like, "Hey, my friend's an artist. Can you take a look at his sketchbook?" And I would just like
seize up.
Yeah, like, here you go, hand him the sketchbook. And like from that point, like I just knew like that type of art and that thing was what I wanted to do. I will say I had a brief period in college where I was like, that's not for me. Like, everybody wants to do fantasy art. All my friends did and whatnot. It seemed to be like the cool, popular thing in art school. And so I was just like, I'll do editorial work. Like, it's more suited for me because I painted traditionally at the time, and my art style was a little more blocky and geometric based. And so it didn't quite lend itself to fantasy art. So I just assumed like, I can't do it, so I'll just do this. And then I somehow kind of naturally made my way back to the fantasy art world. Like, it wasn't an intentional journey.
Right. But I mean, do you think that maybe there was an aspect of yourself that deep down you subconsciously knew that this was for you, and you were gonna go that way regardless? I mean, because it would like maybe a defense mechanism if you're saying like, oh, I don't want to go down the popular route, because there's a fear in that, right? There's a fear that if so many people are going into this, that means that there's much less of a chance of making it. Do you think that could have played into it?
I think that definitely had a role in it. I think what also played a role in it was like one of those. It's like that notion as a kid or like early teenager, early adult, where you're like, oh, I have to push these childish things away. Like I need to
Yeah.
grow up and become a person. And then it's like, nah, you can like what you like. Like you can enjoy Pokemon as a 30-year-old person. Like it's fine. Um, and I think what really kind of brought me back into fantasy art and magic was I left this big corporate job that I had out in Boston, and I wasn't happy at the job.
Was that Reebok?
Yes, yeah. So I did spend a little bit of time at Reebok. I 1 year designing apparel, 1 year doing marketing. And then the marketing job, like the team I worked with was great. In case they see this, the team was great. But the job itself was very boring and very repetitive. And it just got to the point where I was like, I think I need to go. So I moved back to Ohio, and the friend I moved in with, I like just got back. It was like first day in Ohio, like going through the apartment. He's showing me around. He's like, "Oh yeah, in here, da 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 da." And I happen to see some boxes of Magic, and I go, "You play Magic?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, there's a card shop like 10 minutes away, and I go on Fridays and play sometimes." And I was like, "I used to play Magic all the time. I have cards like back home. I'll bring them like from Indiana." And so he and I started to slowly like play more and more Magic. And he's now like a consistent member of my like local play group here. Um, so
That's great.
shouts out Luis.
So it was of that. That's fortuitous. I mean, because
Yeah.
it's a tricky thing. The Magic community is a tricky thing to infiltrate if you don't have a gate, like somebody who sort of shows you the way, or helps you get into
It's like the
the.
Mandalorian. This is the way.
I am so Star Wars ignorant. When it first came out, I was like, Mandalorian. I'm like, isn't that an instrument? And then I was like, that's mandolin, you dummy. But yeah, no, I'm one of those people where like I'm sort of Star Wars just kind of went. I'm like, it's cool, but I don't get the zeitgeist. And I mean, I know that I'm a weirdo in that sense. I get it, but I'm kind of bummed out. I never got the Star Wars zeitgeist. I understand it being brilliant,
Yeah.
but I don't get that like that pull to it that the way you fans do. You get that
Yeah.
like that heavy draw to it. Now,
Yeah.
your art style, how like it's an interesting evolution to watching how things were for you because it seems to have gone through phases. So, how would you describe your style when you began your professional career actively pursuing fantasy art?
Hmm. That's a good question. You've done your research.
Guilty.
I it I can now relate to all those people that are on Hot Ones and they're like sitting there and he asked them, have you watched Hot Ones before?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And like he'll ask some random question. They're like, whoa, like how did you know that? Like
I'm
um
like, yeah. If it's any consolation, it's a whole lot of Twitter scrolling. Like, I tend to do that. I mean, I I love to cyberstalk. What can I say?
nice. Yeah, so I think when I first started kind of tiptoeing into fantasy art, it was more along the lines of like I'll freelance and I'll be the guy who does, colorful, limited color palette pieces that and that's going to be kind of my thing. I'm the color guy. And that was definitely how I started doing conventions was, selling fan art and selling freelance projects that I still owned the rights to as like playmats and things like that. And I sold some freelance work at my booth until I think 2019 was when I finally um, took those all off the table and had enough personal work to kind of fill the table. And then I had a really rough patch in 2018 that kind of led to this art piece called Banishment
Hmm.
that is all about kind of overcoming hard times and kind of coming out of it like, battered and bruised, but you made it. and
Right.
there's, something to acknowledge of like I fucking made it. Like I'm okay. Like I
Yes.
survived that. Um, so I can do anything.
Yes.
And
There's definitely people should take pride in surviving things when they do that. Is you know what I mean? Like people
yeah,
should commend themselves for doing that.
yeah, exactly. And so banishment just kind of came out of nowhere. Like when I started that piece, I had references for it to be two warriors just kind of fighting. Like there's a warrior with a sword and their hands up like this, and they're coming down, and there's like a like smoke demon monster on the ground with his like hand up to block the blow. And that character was supposed to be a warrior with a shield. Like I had reference photos, I had everything, and I started drawing. And then there was just this one day where it was like I was working on the figure on the ground, and it just kind of turned into this smoke skull. And I was like, ooh, I kind of like this. And then I just kept following that. Um,
And
and I'm glad I did, because it led to all the other personal work that I now do.
you have such a obviously your color palette is such a and I mean a giveaway of what like the kinds of the kind of colors you'd use are your stamp. But what's interesting though, I want to ask about this specifically is the thing, the
Oh yeah.
thing. What's the story behind that? Because I love John Carpenter. uh
Yeah. Oh
I
God. That was such a fun project. Because for a while there was like a couple years right out of Reebok that I did a lot of stuff with Gallery 1988 and some of these pop culture art galleries out in California. And they would always have themes to their shows. So sometimes it'd be like, oh, our theme is Tom Hanks, but only till 1993. And then like super specific things like that. That's where I did a Forrest Gump illustration. Um, and then there were other ones that were like Star Wars themed. There was a Magic the Gathering one, which I was lucky enough to do later on. But doing those types of projects, eventually I got contacted by somebody that was like, hey, we're putting together a book of all these artists doing their rendition of the thing. Are you interested? And
uh
they had a short list of artists, and I unfortunately at the time was not familiar with the thing because I'm not a good scary movie person. I get
really.
spooked easily. I don't like it. So I saw the list of artists and I was like, some of these artists are some of my favorite artists. Like I'm in. I'll watch the movie. I'll suck it up. And I watched it. I watched it
Uh-huh.
during the day in daylight.
It's did it get you? I bet it got you.
It was pretty like it. I still remember being like spooked by it, but like for me, scary movies sometimes if I watch them at night, close to like when I go to bed, like it causes that anxiety that then
Yeah.
leads to like weird like anxiety dreams around the movie.
Yeah.
Um, and so I didn't want to do that. And so doing it in the middle of the day gave me plenty of time to like decompress and do something else afterwards that it didn't affect me. But the movie was great. The practical effects are so good.
Astonishing.
The story's great. I love diving in and doing like tons of research on stuff and projects. Specifically, it's kind of nice to do research on stuff that I'm not actually attached to, because then it's kind of fun to go down that rabbit hole and find those little like nooks and crannies where like all the fans are like, oh my God, in the last scene, like, do you know, is he infected or not? It's like, oh, well, did he have a glint in his eye? Because that's like the rumor of the telltale sign that he's and I just
Mhm.
love like following the rabbit like down the hole and finding those little like tiny breadcrumbs that fans love. And so when I research a project that I'm not familiar with, like I just
You do because I am a horror fanatic. I love horror. I've
Mhm.
seen The Thing probably about 20 times. So I can say with very like with authority that your piece captures the essence of the film like
Oh,
100%.
thanks. I appreciate
So
that.
and it's interesting too, is because around that time, just looking back at your art, you sort of went through a period where you were like more using like colors that are akin to my jacket rather than the bright and pink, purples, fuchsias that you do now. Did that have to do with talking about sort of or referencing to the period that you kind of had gone through some dark stuff? Was that coming out in the artwork, or was that just a natural evolution that had nothing to do with it?
Hmm. I I don't think it had anything to do with the stuff that I was going through at the time. Because like the thing with the thing illustration plus some of that earlier work, it was either more based on what the client wanted. And in those days when I was doing those client pieces, it's like I would send them sketches and I'd try to like push the color. I'd be like, well, maybe they'll go for this. And I'll like push it as far as I thought I could get. And then sometimes they'd be like, it's a little too bright for us. Could you like tone these colors back? And I'd, tone them down a bit. Or sometimes they'd be like, oh yeah, that's great. And I'd be like, damn it, I could have pushed it further. Like could have tried. Um,
The pink agenda.
yeah, exactly. And I think too, part of it also maybe subconsciously goes back to this idea that like I had a thing in mind of like what fantasy art and what those types of art should look like, that type of art should look like. Um, and it wasn't bright, colorful neons, pinks, purples, magentas. It was, doom and gloom and, muted tones. And I think over time, I just slowly learned like it doesn't matter what color it is. It can be fantasy art. It can have a dark message. It can have a heavy message, but it can still be bright and hopeful and kind of looking towards that, like, positive
You
outcome.
know, what? Yeah, very true. And I'm curious, were there any people, artists that influenced that sort of that bright color like push that you went, because it is unique to fantasy art. I think eventually down the line with people like you doing it, maybe it won't be as unique
Mhm.
as it started out being. But like, were there any early artists that were in fantasy that did that you found to be inspirational?
So right off the bat, I can't think of specifically fantasy artists like back then that stood out to me as using crazy bright colors and doing more colorful work. Um, Not to say that there weren't any at the time. It was just at the time I was unaware of them. Because as I've gotten more and more into fantasy art and doing like conventions and different like comic cons and exhibitions and stuff, like I've come to know like, oh wow, there's like so many artists across the country that do these cons and are in fantasy shows and things like that like this whole world that I wasn't aware of for several years. And back then I wasn't in that. I didn't do any cons. I didn't really attend any cons. And I hadn't really gone to any of them in quite some time. So I didn't know of anybody. But I would say that there were some artists doing stuff in like the pop art scene, doing like Mondo posters and doing those pop culture art shows at Gallery
Right.
1988 and stuff like that. Like one artist right off the bat that I can think of is his name is Matt Taylor. He does amazing screen prints, does officially licensed stuff for like Marvel and different movies and like posters and stuff. And he's amazing, like also a great guy. I've met him once. And his colors always inspired me because he always just like wouldn't use black in his pieces. It would always be like a deep blue or deep purple or something like that. And so like he inspired me a lot. There's another artist named Eric Jones, who's a contemporary painter, who his earlier work had a lot of very bright colors and shapes within like realistic form. And he would still use realistic skin tones at the time, or sometimes he would use like purple skin tones or something like that. Um, but those were kind of more so the artists that were influencing the bright colors at the time. I think if I did pick a fantasy artist that does a lot of bright colors, that did inspire me and that I did really look up to as a kid when I was like first starting to play Magic, would be Steve Prescott, because
Hmm.
Prescott's work always tends to be a little bit more colorful than the rest of Magic. Also tends to be a little bit more stylized and kind of like it's like it's like a little bit more whimsical, I feel like, than some of the more realistic stuff, just because of his style.
I can
Um,
see that. I agree that makes sense. Yeah.
yeah. Like I had a playset of foil Flamekin Harbingers from Lorwyn for a while that
Wow.
he did the art for, and like I loved the art on those.
So let's see. Okay, so you play a lot of Magic. So how many commander decks do
Oh
you
my
have
god.
that are actively in rotation? Like what's the number?
Trying to think how many my my little what is it? My little utility box that I bought from Home Depot fits. I think there's like 12 in that bin, but most of them aren't in like frequent rotation because I have a lot of different decks that do different things. I have some really mean ones. I have
Ooh, what's
a
your meanest? I'm curious.
my my two meanest are, I think the best one is Yidris, the
Oh,
Maelstrom Wielder, and it's just a chaos landfall cascade deck. So like I ramp Yidris out as early as possible, like best possible hand turn 2, sometimes turn 3. Um
that's some
and
competitive stuff there.
yeah, and I don't try to like storm. I don't want it to be consistent, but then I just ramp like crazy after I get him out and hit for damage. And so then all my ramp spells turn into cascade spells that draw me cards or get me more land spells. And then I'm just like, by turn 5, I have like 14, 15 mana on the board and I can cast like Ulamog um what is it? Akum, the guy that lets you get extra combats with landfall, and
You
then I
know,
just chain like 4 or 5 lands in a row.
I mean, that doesn't. I mean, that's brutal, but I don't know if I'd call that mean because like the meanest one I ever played against was a Memnarch deck, and it was just
Oh,
like,
it's mean because I take really long turns, but I've gotten to the point where like I know how to like cascade fastest, like the fastest possible way to get through it. And the caveat for the deck is that I only run one extra turn spell because there was a minute where I had it with a bunch of extra turn spells, and that was really obnoxious. But then I started playing, online Magic on spell table and stuff, and like, no, that's not fun for
people are
anybody.
like, okay, it's been
Yeah,
7 minutes.
yeah. So the only extra turn spell in the deck is Final Fortune, which is one of my favorite cards ever. Two red, instant, like take another turn after this one, and then you lose at the end of that turn.
That is. I don't know. I think. I mean, I so rarely play red. That is a. I didn't even realize red had an extra turn spell.
It has, I think, 2 or 3. There's one, well, no, the third one, that one counters an ability or like ends the turn, and then on the end of your next turn you die. And that one's from like Amonkhet. But yeah, Final Fortune, my favorite red card, and I have a personal rule with my Yidris deck, which is if I cascade into Final Fortune, assuming it's not like the first time I'm cascading, like the first turn I'm doing it, I have to cast it. And that
You're
makes it,
legally obligated.
yeah, and that makes it way more fun if I'm playing on somebody's stream. Like I think I did this on Chase Carroll's stream. We were all playing higher powered decks, and I like went off really early, and I hit everybody for a bunch of damage, and I was down to like one card in hand, and I cascade into Final Fortune. I'm like, I'm casting it. Like I have pretty much no way of winning, but I have this rule. I'm casting it, and then sure enough, I died at the end of my turn.
So
Um,
you've become quite popular, not just as an artist in the convention scene, but like you become like a popular just like streamer and a popular podcaster. This is all very recent. How did you fall into that world?
it's kind of like, oh God, it's so weird. Like looking back at what things you've done to figure out like how you got to where you are is always a trip because you're like, oh, like that really minuscule decision that I made so long ago, like played a big part in this. Um, and I would say for when it comes to streaming and being on people's streams and kind of being on podcasts in the Magic community, I would go back to probably late 2020, early 21. My buddy Luis, who I mentioned earlier, he and I were both artists. We both went to the same art school. We're in the same like graduating class and everything. And we decided to make a stream because we were like, you know what, like why don't we do a stream that's prioritizing creative people within the Magic community, so folks that have products that they sell or are just content creators that make stuff for Magic that want to be on, and we'll call it Creatives Commander Night. And so we started reaching out to a couple artists that we knew, like Inkland Customs, Cthulhu Cards, and some other people, and we're like, hey, if you want to be on, like both of us are artists, we make playmats. and tokens. Like if you want to be on, like we'd love to have you. You can promote what what you do. And our whole goal was like we wanted everybody to be able to be like, hey, look at this cool thing I make for Magic, for everybody who loves to collect this game and bling out their decks and things like that. And it was a really fun experience, and I had a blast doing it, and I got to meet and play Magic with a ton of amazing content creators and community members and artists. But unfortunately, it just got to the point where I and Luis both were getting to the point where we were turning Magic more into a job than we wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And we would get off stream, and I remember just being like, oh, like that wasn't really fun because of all the work that goes into doing the stream, and
Yeah.
even doing something like what you're doing. Like there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, and if that is more of your hobby than your job, then you run into that weird area where you're like, I don't like my hobby anymore.
Yeah, it's becoming a jobby, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Art.
so then you step back from that, but then I seen you are you've been championed obviously by Chase, but Shivam, like it's really cool to see these people backing you up, really supporting you and pushing you to higher heights. So what led to your first official gig? I mean, I think I actually contacted you around the time it was like right before it was going to announce that you were announce it, but what was the first official like Wizards connected gig that you got? And tell me about the story behind that.
So I don't know if it counts as the first official Wizards connected gig, but back in 2018, Gallery 1988, at the time, I was slowly kind of, I was lessening, I was like lowering my involvement with them. Not for any particular reason. It was just like freelance was picking up and I didn't have as much time to just do like these like alternate movie posters and pieces for them. Um, and they happened to email me at the time still, and they were like, hey, here's a list of shows we have coming up. We're doing a Magic the Gathering show. You interested? And I was like, yes. And I
Yeah.
don't think they realized how much I loved Magic because I sent them like a book of an email because I was like, I have ideas.
Hey, I've got thoughts. I've got thoughts.
And it wasn't even like, hey, you should do this. It was more of like, hey, I'm not sure if you're aware of how many content creators that do Magic content live in California.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like
there's a
you
lot.
should reach out to these channels. And I was like, like the Command Zone, Commanderin, and I think I knew that Tulare Community College wasn't in California, but I was like, yeah, he's close by. Like put
He's
him on the list.
adjacent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like put him on the list, put some other people on the list. And I was like, you guys should reach out to these content creators because if they attend your show and promote it, like more Magic players will see it. And that was kind of my first brush of doing an officially licensed like Wizards of the Coast piece, because the gallery was working with Wizards, and everything that we did as the artist, we had to send sketches to the gallery. The gallery sent those sketches to Wizards, and then Wizards went yay or nay. And I sent a piece of Chandra on the ground, just like going fucking Super Saiyan, like fire coming out of her every which way, ground cracking. And then I also submitted a sketch of Ugin and Bolus intertwined falling and
Wow.
fighting. And it was around the time that they were doing the story where like I think it was the set where they printed the Nicol the Ravager. So it was like that story of like Ugin and Bolus and kind of, their
Right. I think
conflict
when
between each
yeah.
other.
Yeah, they started really kind of button horns if that.
Yeah.
And so,
Um,
okay, so you submitted those
yeah.
and
And they
then
picked the Chandra piece. So I did that. And then I had this idea and I was like, oh my God, instead of prints, can I send you playmats? Because Magic players love playmats. They're
yeah.
like, yeah, sure, let's do that. And I was like, oh, could I like put the Magic logo on it? And they're like, let us find out. So they asked the people at Wizards and they gave the approval, and they sent me, an Illustrator file, the logo, copyright, all that, was able to put it in the corner. And so that was my first ever officially licensed Magic piece, but I wasn't paid by Wizards for that. It wasn't until 2021 that a friend of mine who's he's the creator of Mouse Guard, David Peterson. Yes, David Peterson. It doesn't sound right because I keep thinking of that one shitty alt-right dude with the last name Peterson. But
Jordan
David
Peterson.
yes, that's the one. But David Peterson, the creator of Mouse Guard, a lovely human being, he works like, I think his publisher for a long time was Through Boom Comics, or maybe it's currently Through Boom. But when the announcement came out that there was going to be a Magic the Gathering comic, he messaged me and he was like, "Hey, I passed along your work to an art director at Boom." And I was like, "Oh my God, like, thank you so much." And a couple months later, I get an email and they're like, "Hey, we'd love to have you do a White Planeswalker." And they gave me a list of different people I could choose from. And I was like, Ajani seems like the coolest one out of all of these. And I really just was like, okay, this is my chance to do an officially paid, like, Magic the Gathering project.
Right,
Like,
right.
I'm gonna pull out all the stops on it. So I actually inked that traditionally, scanned the inked drawing in, and then did all the colors digitally.
It's a beautiful piece. I remember seeing it when I got my copy, and I was like, this is just, I thought, fantastic. Like,
Thank you.
he got in the gate, and I mean, and well deserved. It's a compelling piece. Also, I think emotionally, having that comic come out around the time where Ajani was being Phyrexianized was, it was nice to see him at his
Yeah.
best, like where he was not murdering Jaya, or
Yeah. Yeah.
depressing
Or he
depressing me deeply.
he went on his little emo. He went in his emo phase.
He did. Yeah. I mean, like, I'd say, yeah. I mean, very mass slaughtery emo, but emo nonetheless.
Yeah.
It wasn't his fault. He was drinking. No, so the way that but it was a beautiful piece, and I actually went out of my way to find that version, because I was like, that's the cool one. Like, you pick the ones that you like.
Yeah. It is funny that cover, because it was one of those like mystery variants, and like when you get the comic, it's like sealed in that plastic bag, and it has the like insert that's just like magic variant, and you don't know what it is. But because it's me, you can just turn it on the side with the
spine.
and you can tell. Like the
Yeah, you're
guy
like,
at the comic shop, because I bought one myself because I was like, I want to own the cover that I did. And so I went in there and I was like, oh, can I like look a little closer? And he goes, oh, no, not really. Like, it's supposed to be a mystery. And he hands it to me, and I just like look at the spine. I was like, we're good.
that's so cool that you weren't like, no, I'm on the cover of this. This is like, I'm not, like BS,
Yeah.
and I just kind of want to get a copy of the cover I did, please. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's nice of you. Very, very humble. Okay, so then I'd say, okay, so let's do hypotheticals, because I like to do this. If you
Hell
could,
yeah.
do some dream cards, some dream art, who or what would be the magic cards that you would love to do? If you say, let's say, maybe a reprint and a planeswalker and a creature, like, are there,
Okay. Those are good questions. A reprint. I want to do Zabaz the Glimmer Wasp. I
I can see
love
that.
modular. Modular is like one of my favorite hyperfixations. And I wish I could show you my Google search history right now, because like the last few weeks I've been like debating whether or not I want to turn my Zabaz the Glimmer Wasp deck into a Shalai and Halar
You could send me a
modular
screenshot
deck.
of it and I could put it up.
I'll have to do that. But I've looked at pretty much all of the like first page links of like Shalai and Halar modular, because I'm like trying to do all the research of like, is it worth it? Because like I just love modular. It's such a fun ability, and it's so goofy and silly, and people underestimate it. And then suddenly you have like a Zabaz the Glimmer Wasp that's completely covered by 6-sided die. So
The
I'd say
40/40.
Zabaz. Yeah, like there was one time at the Magic Summit last November that Alex from the Spike Feeders was using my Zabaz deck to play a game, and I look over and he just has all the six-sided dice just like laid out, like completely covering Zabaz, because he had also played that enchantment from New Campana that's like whenever thing leaves the battlefield with counters, you move them to something else. And then he also had the Ozolith.
Oop, yep, that'll do it.
So it very quickly got out of hand. I was like, that's insanity. So that would be my reprint. My Planeswalker would probably be Ugin would be really fun. I'm gonna say Ugin because I would say Chandra, but I already did Chandra for that piece.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna say Ugin. Any kind of character that has like really cool like magic powers that like I can really go ham on in terms of like the energy and the design language.
I kind of was hoping you would say Liliana because I really would love to see. I'd love to see what you would do with her because she's swirly. She's got the purple. Yeah. She's got, and you do those like really good, face, like the feminine face. I mean, I'd be curious to see that one, but Ugin is also definitely very much up your alley as far as like, because he is super. Yeah. He's got all that like magic around him.
Yeah, pre desparked Karn, it would have been fun to also do Karn because I also have a soft spot for like big bulky characters like that. Because Karn kind of falls under the same category as Alphonse from Full Metal. Mm-hmm. And I did in 2020, I did this small little like fan art piece of Al, and it was like one of my favorite little like drawings that I've done. And I just loved those big bulky characters who have like huge fucking shoulder pad things and like just are fun shapes to draw. So Karn would have also been fun to do. And then Creature, Kill and Mouth Dragon.
Interesting.
It's such a bad card because Amplify is awful, but it's one of my favorite pet cards.
That's great. Yes.
Nothing feels quite as good as having a creature that you can tap and just deal 12 points of damage to any target.
You know what? That's pretty true. I was gonna say like maybe eating a really good meal after being starving, but you know what? Compared to that, no, I think you're right. I think that is the victory.
I would definitely be intimidated though to do that card because Carl Critchlow, the original artist, is one of my favorite Magic artists, like hands down.
But at the same time, I think I understand your intimidation, but there is a like legacy that I've noticed with you artists. Like there's a lineage of things. You like whoever inspired you growing up, you carry their like artistic DNA in your work, and then your work will then one day do the same for the next generation. Yeah. So I feel like it's almost like an artist's duty to sort of to do that as a way to kind of continue the legacy of that particular line of work. I mean, if that makes any sense.
Oh yeah, I would definitely like if I was given that opportunity, I would find a way to reference the original art somehow. Mm-hmm. Or like throw back to some well-known piece by him, just because it would be a little nod of like, oh, that meant that card meant so much to me growing up and was one of my favorite cards, still is. I have a play set of foils. Like it's just one of those cards that like I would have to really take my time with.
That's I mean, I get it. I get that. Now you also have a very, as behind me detests, a huge collection of tokens that you work on. You've got playmats as well. The impetus behind that, like who was there? Was it somebody who said you should do this, or was it just somebody or you came up with the idea? But you are like you're like a factory of token machine. You're like a machine. It's impressive.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm not as much of a machine as Inkling Customs. Like she definitely just churns out tokens so fast. But when it comes to making Magic related product, when I started doing conventions, I had prints for a while, but I was like, I want to do other things besides just art prints because art prints is kind of limiting when it comes to selling at conventions. because everybody has, you know, a limited amount of wall space. Some people are renters, they can't hang things up. They're college kids, so they can't afford, you know, really nice prints and art. Um, so I was trying to figure out different things that I could do. And I tried some products that didn't work so well, and some things that I was like, I didn't really have my like heart behind them. But then it just kind of made sense to me to be like, well, what do I like? Well, okay, well, I like playing Magic. Okay, I like, you know, playmats. And one thing I used to do growing up was I would get a blank playmat at Gen Con and I'd go around and get artists to draw on it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I still have a couple of these like in my in like a chest downstairs where it's like, you know, little tiny drawings and like all over the
I'd
mat.
love to see that. That'd be cool to see.
Yeah, I'll take a picture after this and send it to you. And if you want to use it, you can.
Oh, I want to use it for sure.
Um but yeah, so I have a couple of those playmats like that. And I was like, well, why don't I try to do playmats? And at first I couldn't quite afford investing in playmats because the vendors that I could find at that time were like, you have to buy 50 of one design. Like that's it. And it was like, you know, pretty expensive per
Yeah,
mat, like
yeah.
over $10 or something like that. And thankfully, at the time, I had made friends with a guy who owned a card shop here in Columbus, not like a physical like store card shop, but like an online storefront. And then he sets up in our local game store and sells singles like on Fridays. And so I befriended him, and he was like, well, actually, he's like, what if we split the cost of production and then we split the profits? And then if you take them to a con and you're the one selling them, you get an extra 10%
Wow.
of those profits. And I was like, this seems like a really good deal. We, you know, signed a contract, put it all in writing, and like agreed to it. And we worked that way for like a year or two. And then once I kind of had this moment where I was like, okay, I can afford this. I can, you know, I've gotten to the point where I can do this myself now.
Right.
Um, and we parted ways mutually from that. So that led to me doing playmats. And then I think at one point I tried doing metal tokens where I had like just 4 designs or 3 designs or something. And the metal tokens, like some people do those and they look great and I like them, but there were just some things that I didn't like about how the manufacturer that I got at the time, how they did it. And it was like kind of streaky, and I'm real picky about the quality of my stuff. Because I'm picky about the quality of the things that I buy and I use for like Magic
Yeah,
and
that's
and my hobbies. And so like it has to stand up to those standards for me. Um, which led to the current cards that I have for my tokens, which are actually like a playing card material. So the nice thing with these is they don't warp or anything because they're not cardstock. They're kind of that like that fabric kind of or not fabric, that like canvasy looking material.
right. Right. It can
And
take more durability to it.
yeah, and I've had the same set, not this current one right here, but I've had the same set for like over probably 2 years now, and like they don't look any different than when I first got them.
Wow.
And I
That's
didn't sleeve them or anything. They're just like live in the box that I take to the game store.
You didn't sleeve them. Oh, that's
Eh,
I always get such anxiety when I see people without sleeves. Yeah, granted your instance is different, but like
yeah.
it's always a
Mine,
terrible
mine's
thing.
mine's more of like, well, if they get ruined, it's not like I don't have several hundred more of them in my home.
Yeah, you know the artist pretty well,
Yeah.
so you could probably just call him up by like saying self.
Yeah. And then over the years, I've just had little like interactions with people or suggestions from people that have led to kind of the tokens evolving. So like on this new set, I posted on Twitter, I was like, hey, Magic Twitter, what do you guys think about names? Like, should tokens have names? Should they not have names? Because then you can use them for more things. And my previous batch didn't have names because I thought, oh, you can use them for more things, so I won't put a name on them. And then on Twitter, pretty much everybody was like, we want names, put
Yeah.
names. So I added names to this batch. I also added black borders. And then my previous batch, somebody before I made the previous batch was like, oh, you should make these double-sided. And usually when I get feedback from like attendees at cons, it's usually like, have you ever thought about doing more black and white work? And I'm like, no, I haven't thought of that. Like, but
No,
I'm not
black and
gonna do
white.
that.
Who would?
Yeah,
I've never like
yeah.
that's no. I
That's legit like advice given from a attendee one con, and I just like usually it's bad advice,
You're like,
but this
thank
person,
you for that. I understand the most fundamentally basic parts of art, like,
yeah,
but thank you.
yeah, it's like,
But
I'm
maybe,
always nice to them, and I was like, yeah, okay, like I hadn't thought of that, sure, and
but
then they walk away,
maybe,
and I'm like,
maybe in their like probably maybe in their very like sort of backward way of saying it, maybe they mean like they want to see like your style, but yet with like almost like if you took it and you inversed it like on a program, the way that it would look then, like
yeah,
maybe that's what they're thinking,
yeah,
or something, because
yeah.
or maybe they're just very
Yeah, I know it's always one of those things where it's like they mean well, so that's why I'm always like, oh yeah, like sure, that's
yeah,
I'll
there's a
keep it in
little
mind, and
little
then
little dopey.
then they leave, and I'm like, we're not gonna do that. But
Have
somebody
you?
one con was like, you should make your tokens double sided, and I was like, that's a great idea. So now they're double sided, so basically you get two of each token in a pack. And I know I always hate it when like you get a pre-con, like I think it was that
Oh yeah.
Maya token one with is like Geared, the guy that makes rhinos. They're like, here's one rhino token.
Oh,
Like
that's worst.
the whole deck is all about making rhinos. Like, why only one?
Why would you do that? Yeah,
And
it's
then you're stuck with a dice that's like, these are my blockers, and then here's my one rhino that's attacking.
yeah,
So that's why I did the double sided, because it's like now you can have a stack that's untapped and a stack that's tapped.
yeah, that is a problem. That like I mean, I guess if the costs were like it can't be that much more expensive to throw a few more tokens, right? I'd be like, I'll just pay for the more
It
tokens. Like
can't.
it can't be. Like what is it? Like what, 5 cents tops? I don't know. I'll pay for them because they're a pain in the ass to get,
Mm-hmm.
after the fact.
Yeah.
And I always forget to do it. I always forget. I'm like, I'll be playing a game of Magic and I'm like, damn it, I needed to get those tokens. I'll get them next time. And then I forget. And then
Yeah.
it's what's done is done. What is your most popular token?
Ooh, that's a good question. Let me look. Um, hmm. I think the one that's probably the most memorable one to me in terms of like somebody seeing the art and making the decision to then buy the pack or packs is the zombie. It's this little guy right there. Um, and I think it's just a testament to how many people play zombies as a tribe, because I had a guy at a Star City Games con come up and he saw the pack and he's like, oh, does it have zombies in it? I was like, yeah, there's one zombie token. He goes, okay, can I buy the zombies separately? And like, just buy like 10 of them, just 10 zombies. And I was like, unfortunately, it's all a mixed like pack. And he just goes, I'll get 10 packs. I was like, cool.
That there you go.
Yeah.
There you
So like
go.
that's the only one that sticks out to me in terms of like most popular. I think a lot of people like the plant token because Avengers Zendikar. Um, Dragons are popular. I did just add treasure, so that might be the new popular one with this pack.
Treasures are pretty popular.
Yeah.
It's yeah, and then I mean, so and you do you how well, like how diligently do you focus on say like incubate, or when the new stuff comes out, do you like feel obligated to do that, or is it something that you pick and choose?
It's definitely a pick and choose. I don't keep up with the new like tokens that come out with each set. Just because then for me, then I would be, letting that make the decisions for me. And I like to kind of be in control of the art and how it's made and everything. And like that's not to say that like, I'm not in control of the art when doing that, because I can, clearly make it into whatever I want, but I'm letting whatever magic is making dictate what I make versus how I actually make my tokens, which is I make personal art. And it has a story to it, and it's, based on different emotions or things going on in my life. And then I look at that art and go, what could this be as a token?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um,
And your
And
personal art it does have a distinct narrative to it. I'm interested about that. Like it seems like you work out a lot of your, maybe say trickier stuff that goes on internally with that personal work. And so that's really cool that you're able to um put it into a token and still have it be an authentic representation of what it is that you were going
yeah,
for.
yeah.
So give us an example of one of those pieces that turned into a token and how you came to that decision to do it.
So I would say the dragons in it, in the token pack. So there's three different dragons. There's a 6/6, a 4/4, and a 5/5. And those dragons all come from a piece of mine called Squadron. I recently posted that image on Twitter. So if you're listening to this and you want to go find out a little bit about the story and check out the full illustration, it's on my Twitter. The story behind it is that it's, there's one main dragon in the forefront. It's the one on my 6/6 dragon token. And it's got a dragon rider on it, and it's swooping down and it's charging like a big energy blast in front of its face, and it's getting ready to just, fly in and mess some people up. And then there's three other dragons in the background, all kind of in supporting roles to that front dragon. And those three dragons in the background are all based on three of my friends that are convention artists, that are fantasy artists that I met early on in 2018 when I first started doing personal work, and was, still pretty early in my convention career, like a couple years in, but still pretty early. And they really helped me out a ton. They, were just great people when I was having a really rough time. And I really admired them and appreciated what they had done for me. So I took things that I admired about them as individuals and things that I admired about their art and used that to design the three dragons in the background. So there's one dragon that has these like really ornate horns and like a lion's mane. And that's based on my friend Timothy Von Ruden, who goes by Von Art.
Yeah.
His art is black and white graphite with gold like flourishes, and it just feels very regal and royal. And so like that's why I thought of like a lion. And it also kind of uh influenced the choice of having the horns on the dragon, because it made it feel like a crown
Right.
adorning the head of the dragon. And he also draws amazing, like really ornate horns and details and things like that in his work. And then his dragon rider on that dragon is like very laid back, and that's partially because like his energy at a convention is very like chill, go with the flow, like everything's fine, and he's just a very calming person to be around. And then each other dragon is also influenced by, same similar vibes of different friends. So like the dragon up at the top that has like a unicorn horn is based on a friend of mine who goes by Gaki art. And Gaki's art looks very fluffy and fuzzy and light and airy. And so that dragon, I wanted it to feel light and fluffy and airy. And they also put horns on a lot of like random animals like cows and stuff. Um, and then the third dragon is based on my friend Sean Price, or Art of Price, who does a lot of bird illustrations. And so his dragon is based more on a bird, kind of like a crane.
That's beautiful. I mean, that's one thing that I will say about the artist community is you guys are very supportive of one another. I mean,
Yeah.
very protective, very much like a brethren of like just good faith. It's a lovely thing to see, especially in the arts. I would say maybe not. There's not a chance for say like actors or musicians to really because they're sort of pitted against each other like really hardcore. Whereas of course you guys are competing for the same positions, but for whatever reason, the the love is there.
Oh yeah. And I think too, like we all kind of understand, and I'm speaking just specifically like my really close knit artist group, my little art fam. We all are pretty different in terms of our like styles, where our art comes from, and kind of our usual audience at a con. Like my friend Sean, who his dragon's the bird dragon, he always jokes that he gets cool dads. He gets the like tattooed, like middle-aged, like cool dads. And then like my friend Gawky, they tend to get a lot of um kids that are like figuring out who they are and understanding, like beginning their journey being a trans individual. And
Mm.
their work speaks to that. And I think it's really cool to see, especially when I'm next to Gaki at a show. I love seeing like all these kids that come up and they just have such an attachment to their art. And like, that's so cool.
That's
Um,
interesting too, isn't it?
yeah.
That they're, I mean, obviously art has the ability to decode
Mhm.
to the audience things that are not being overtly said. So it's amazing to see that these people are picking up on that and realizing that that's what is being said.
Yeah. And
And
then
who
like,
would you say yours is then? Who would you say your demographic? What kind
so
of
I always joke that if they have colored hair, colored glasses, they're gonna come to my table.
that? Yeah.
Which is pretty solid assessment. But I also have been getting a lot of therapists and social workers, which I think is kind of cool.
That
And
makes
I take that as
sense.
a huge compliment
That makes sense.
because yeah, like I at the last show I was at, I have two pieces called Broken and Worthy, and they're both very dark, both in color palette and in story compared to the rest of my work. Um, and that is because they come from a graphic novel I started in 2020 about anxiety and depression that originated from my own feelings during the early days of the pandemic,
Yeah.
and kind of realizing that I had a lot of my self-worth tied up in how well I was doing financially at the time, which
Oh,
isn't a good thing.
no.
Um, and it was very hard because I was struggling to make ends meet and make money. And so my self-worth went way down. And I decided to make this graphic novel, and it's based on my characters from my Banishment series, which started all of my personal work. But in Banishment, you're seeing that moment of victory and you're seeing the character overcome this darkness. Um, and it just made sense to me at the time to go back and revisit these characters and ask the question, what was the struggle? What did the struggle look like? So in the graphic novel, I'm showing what led up to Banishment and to that moment of victory. Um, and so Broken shows, the lowest point of the character, and then Worthy is kind of a really great counterpiece to it because it's got the character reaching out for a sword that's coming out of the ground. It's glowing, emanating all this power, and the smoke monster demon is kind of pushed away from them, and the warrior is wiping away a tear and reaching for the sword. And with that piece, I like to see it as a reminder that, when you're at your lowest point, you're still worthy of love and empathy and of a chance. And you need to reach out to people because like that's your weapon to fight back against that depression, anxiety. And at this con, I was talking about those pieces to somebody who'd come up and been like, these two pieces are really speaking to me. What are they about? And I told her, and she goes, oh my gosh, she's like, I'm a therapist. And like, oh, those are fantastic. Like I unfortunately can't afford them right now, but do you have a website? And I was like, yep, here's my card. She was like, yeah, I would love to buy those once I, finish school and become an actual therapist. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. And
That
then
makes a
like,
lot of sense.
yeah. And then like later in the day, another woman came up to me and she was picked out those pieces again. And I was talking about them. She's like, oh, I'm a therapist. I was like, oh, that's so cool. So like that to me, I feel like is such a huge compliment. Like if therapists come up and they like are like, oh my God, I love these. And I tell them the story and they're like, oh, I love it even more. Um, that to me just means a lot.
That creates a connection between your art having an innate therapeutic quality to it, because therapists are you have to be very decisive and very particular and very careful about what you're hanging in your office space,
Yeah.
because you don't want to, like hang a poster of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, let's say.
Yeah.
Maybe, I mean, I love the movie, it's a classic, but I wouldn't do that myself.
Yeah.
But to this stuff, your stuff it evokes the feelings of getting it out that
Yeah.
um therapy is good for and necessary for. And yeah, that makes total sense when you put it that way. So what personal are you working on anything now that you are allowed to talk about? What kind of stuff are you working on now? What's the current
Okay.
workload?
So the current workload is, I say this with the caveat that I'm going to knock on wood on this, that I am about to wrap up the last freelance job that I have. And that's because if I don't say that, then I'm going to get like flooded with a million projects when I don't want to. Uh, and that freelance job is, I can talk a little bit about it because the first half of it already came out. So late last year, I was approached by a company that makes cool posters for video games, and they work with the studios to do that. And they approached me about doing a Mass Effect poster. And I submitted 2 sketches, and something happened that normally doesn't happen, because in the artist world, we are told, don't show your client a sketch you don't like, because they'll pick the one you don't like every single time. Like if you give them your favorite sketch and the one that you don't like, they'll pick the one you don't like.
I see.
In my case, I gave them 2 sketches that I did like for different reasons. And they went, "We love both of these so much. We would like to pay you to do both."
Wow.
So
That's really cool.
thanks. I finished the first one, and that one is called at the core. And it's basically just a poster of headshots of all the main characters. And then Shepard, who's kind of the main character, is at the core of the piece, like in the center. And then all the other characters, Liara, um, Rex, Garrus, Legion, who's the other one? Talia, are all around Shepard. And then the second one I am wrapping up this week. I'm like so close to being done with it. And then that'll be off my plate. And both of those pieces were huge because they are just a ton of work and a ton of details. And I've also been trying to incorporate more of a traditional like texture in some of my work. So I've been using a lot of like the Procreate pencil brushes and things like that. And it takes a long time, and it's like I'm still playing around and figuring it out, but I'm really liking the look of both of them. And especially the second one is definitely out of my comfort zone, because it's no characters. It's like vehicles and robots and things that I don't normally do. And so it's a lot of straight lines, a lot of perspective, a lot of, metallic things, which are very detailed. And so that's why it's taking so long, but I'm really enjoying the outcome.
And who, like that's the interesting, who knows,
Yeah.
you might end up becoming, that might become your next like phase of evolution, because
Yeah.
if you get the response to it, I'm sure will be positive, but
Yeah.
that's, you can never tell what way your road's going to travel, right?
Yeah. I'm just gonna put this out there right now. If that's my next phase of development as an artist, I
Hmm.
really want to do Gundam Wing. Like somebody pay me to do a Gundam illustration.
We'll put the word, call everybody, listen. Yes.
Yeah. Um, and then when it comes to personal work, I do have a personal piece I'm working on right now. Um, that's roughly based on uh I still haven't quite figured out how to talk about it yet. So this is how all of my personal work goes. This is a little like, glimpse behind the curtain. When I work on the piece and as it like matures and gets closer to being finished, I figure out more and more how to talk about the piece and what the story is. Like I feel like I have like a core gut feeling of like, oh, this is what the piece is about. But then it takes me time working on it and thinking about it to figure out exactly like pinpoint what it is.
I see. So
So the rough version of what this one is about people in your life who are manipulators that you don't pick up on right away.
hmm,
And then eventually you have this moment where you find out from other people that that this person was manipulating you, was manipulating them, and doing it in different ways with each of you. And so the piece has like a snake coiling around and like different hands. And the current working title for it is spellcaster, because it's like this idea that this, this witch is casting spells and manipulating people to kind of go along with her, with what she wants
Her
you to do,
agenda.
and her agenda, and making herself to be the victim. And then that eventually comes back to bite her, and that's why the snake is there.
It's such a rough lesson to learn, and
Mhm.
you can't teach a young kid that, like, you have to watch out for these types of people, but
Yeah,
it's just eventually you will run into one and you will be had, and
yeah,
it sucks out loud. And it's,
yeah,
I guess it's a rite of passage, but it's tough. It's really
yeah,
tough. Like, I think we all have those people where we were like, wow, that person played me like a fiddle.
yeah.
Not easy, but and that's so, but that's cool that you take on the heavy topics with your personal work, because you know I feel I feel like that's a catharsis for you,
Mhm.
alone.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it helps me a lot, and that's more than worth it. And makes it, more than worth it to do the art, like, let alone putting it out there and sharing it with other people. And part of that comes from my love of Linkin Park. I love Linkin Park. They're like my favorite band.
Very good. It's
And
so
back
sad. So sad.
Yeah, and back when Chester Bennington passed away in 2017, Mike Shinoda put out an album in 2018 called Post Traumatic that was all about him kind of coming out of like the darkness of Chester's passing. And that album resonated with me so much, because I was just like, here's this guy who, like, he could have just, receded into the darkness and just kind of kept his whole private life private and just to him, and like kept this healing journey to himself. But he knew that so many other people out there go through what he's going through or have
Yeah,
gone through that.
the
And
fans were
so,
mourning collectively. It.
yeah. And like, I've been fortunate enough to have met Mike Shinoda once, and he's just a delightful human, like one of those instances where meeting your heroes totally lives up to the expectation.
Yeah.
And he's just so down to earth and so nice and so like sweet. And that album really inspired me at the time, because it came out around the time that I was going through a bunch of really hard things, um, and had experienced a death in my family, and
Mm.
and that led to the banishment piece, because I was like, I'm gonna, like, when banishment started to turn into what it is now, with like the smoke skull demon monster in it, I kind of had this moment of like, I'm gonna make this, because if this helps somebody else, even if it's just one other person, like, that's more than worth it. um and after I did banishment, I've had some instances at cons where I've told somebody the story and they get teary-eyed and they're like, oh my God, my mom has been dealing with cancer and she's in remission right now. And they bring their mom over to me, and like those moments to me, like making money off of your art is great, but like having those moments where like art that I made was able to, help somebody express how they were feeling, or,
It's the purpose of art really is to
yeah,
do that, right? It's to help
yeah,
people put to words that they can't on their own.
yeah. And I think that to me is kind of like, that's why I do art. Like like I was telling a friend pretty recently, like a couple months ago at a con, like we were talking about like why we do what we do, because there are artists out there who do fan art and they make a killing on fan art, and that's great, and fan art is fantastic. I love fan art. um and we were like, well, why don't we do fan art? And we kind of started having this like introspective night where we were all talking about it, and it was like, well, you know it's not because we don't love those things and those IPs and those characters. It's because, like, a friend of mine, her art is very funny and like makes people laugh, and she made somebody like cry laughing at that con, and she's like, that's
That's
why
great.
I do this. She's like,
Right.
because I can make people laugh, and I know my art is funny, and like I know I'm funny, and like that's why I do it. And like I kind of had this moment of like, Oh, I think I do this because of like, being able to kind of be a catalyst for people to, express themselves, express their emotions, feel their emotions, and also feel like they are in a safe enough space that they can.
Did you ever let that musician know that you had been inspired so much? Have you ever
Uh,
thought about like telling them that story? I mean, I wonder.
I
I
did.
wonder.
I did make a Twitter post. I think it was in like June of 2019, and it was like a long thread. And I did tag Mike Shinoda in that thread. I did also attend a concert of his. It was the same weekend as the Magic the Gathering art show at Gallery 1988. So I went
Busy
out for
boy.
the opening, and I was like, well, I can write off this whole trip now, and then I can go see Mike Shinoda the day after the art show.
That's that's not too shabby.
Yeah, so I did that, and it was a great weekend. And I didn't get to meet him again at that show because I had met him, kind of to backtrack a little bit. I had met him at a art show at Gallery 1988 for Star Wars The Force Awakens,
Hmm.
because they did an art show called Art Awakens, and all the art was auctioned off to benefit UNICEF. And some people's art got turned into prints, I think, and there was like a limited number sold, and then all the pieces in the actual gallery were sold. Well, turns out the gallery owner at the time was friends with Mike Shinoda, like had gone to school with him growing up, and asked him to be a part of the show. And so he did a piece for the show. He painted like a stormtrooper suit with like scenes from Star Wars all over it. And I was like, holy shit, he's gonna be there. And he showed up at the show, and I, waited till he had walked around a bit and went up and was like, hey, like, I'm a huge fan. And I just saw you take a picture of my art, so I wanted to come introduce myself. Like, you're a huge inspiration to me. And he was just a delight and so nice and so friendly. So back to going to his concert, I wasn't able to meet him there because the meet and greet tickets were really expensive and I couldn't quite afford it. But I befriended some people who like do meet and greets all the time, and they actually like invited me to come hang out with them during the day while they were waiting for the concert to start, because I was just walking around like LA
It's
with
like,
nothing to do.
yeah,
My
like,
friend I was going to the concert with was at work until like 6 p.m. And I just posted on Twitter, I was like, hey, any Linkin Park fans going to this Mike Shinoda show in LA? And somebody like messaged me and they're like, actually I am. And we went back and forth chatting, and they were like, I mentioned like, oh, I couldn't afford the meet and greet tickets, but like I would love to, talk to him again because I'm an artist and he, inspired my art. And this person was like, oh, well, me and my friends are gonna do the meet and greet. Like, we might be able to get you in. Like, if you come like meet us, like we're just like outside the venue. There's a line, like we're just hanging out. And I was like, cool. Um, and they were delightful, and I hung out with them for like 5 hours, and they
nice.
tried their best to get me into the meet and greet. And it didn't work out, but I was like, hey, I was like to one of them, I was like, do you mind taking this metal print of my banishment piece? And I was like, can you, do you mind giving this to Mike? And I just wrote a little note on the back, and I was like, hey, I met you at Gallery 1988 a couple years ago. And, you've always inspired my art. And you did it again with post traumatic after I went through a really rough patch. And so here's the piece that I did because of that. So thank you. And I like wrote that on the back and gave it to that person. And they gave it to him, and they said like he like it was one of those moments where like I don't think they relayed the message back to me. They were like, yeah, he took it, he thought it was cool, like, but that was kind of it. And so it wasn't like, oh, there was like, oh, he thought that was so sweet, or like it was just like, yeah, I gave it to him, he thought it was cool, like,
Oh, that you did well. In that
yeah.
situation, you needed to be. You know what I mean? Like, it's like,
Exactly. It's like no fault to them, no fault to him. It
yeah,
was
they
just
they
like,
can't sell it the way they
yeah.
can't sell the experience. Well,
Exactly. And it was still one of those things where it's like I I'm still very grateful for that, and for, meeting those friends, and they're so delightful, and every so often I talk to them online since then. And yeah, I just love how like Linkin Park fans are just like the best fans out there. They're so nice and
that's
so
nice.
friendly and so wholesome. Um and yeah.
Like, I'll tell you this much: Tori Amos fans, not so much. Not really. No, I think, but so, just saying. But so that's nice that you guys have a supportive community. But uh, that's fantastic. So, is if people one quick question before I go, like, you designed those jackets, right? Those clothes, like the clothing designs that you do, those
Yeah.
things are so fantastic. And I know you're not taking like any freelance work, but like would you ever do a freelance like design for clothing if somebody like paid you up the wazoo? Like just
Yeah.
I mean, because like
Um,
you got some good chops for that.
Thanks. I really appreciate that. So I am still very much open to freelance. I'm just trying to be a lot pickier about the freelance I take. Because the last couple of years I've done a lot of freelance that was like, hey, we want you to do like 50 illustrations. Our budget is there for it, but like we want 50 illustrations. And that's a
A
lot.
lot. That's a
And
lot.
then you don't really get a lot of time to work on your own personal stuff. Like even if you're balancing your time well and you're consistently working on that project, like it still is very draining.
Yeah.
And the art director I worked with for that project is fantastic. I love him to death. He's great. One of my favorite art directors I've ever worked with. But recently it was difficult. I had to turn down working with them again to do another like 40, 45 illustrations because I was like, I just don't have
Exactly.
it in me again right now. Like I've done it for 2 years straight. Like I can't.
Yeah.
Um,
Burnout
and
happens.
yeah, and so I think I'm trying to do more kind of one-off freelance things here and there. And I would love to do a team up with like a cool clothing brand.
It would be so
There's
good.
there's one brand that I love and adore called BB Sama that I actually talked to some of their team at a convention I did a couple months ago, and they were like, yeah, we'd be interested in like maybe potentially collaborating with you, like because they saw my hoodies and they're like, that's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
um
Your stuff's great.
Thanks. I again go it goes back to the Reebok days of I
But
did a lot of apparel design and graphic design for
But,
them.
but there you go. I mean, like even though the job was, monotonous, and it was not something that you wanted to do for, your lifetime of work, it gave you the chops to make the stuff that looks like something
Yeah.
that is,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
fashionista.
Thanks. And two, the another like and another driving kind of aspect of that project was the fact that it's really hard to find good colorful clothing, and especially for men it's like
Oh
impossible to
yeah,
find good colorful clothing. Like it's just so hard.
yeah. Mm-mm.
And I was like, you know what, I was like, why don't I just make my own? Like I know how to find vendors for things. I have friends that have vendor connections. And so I messaged a couple friends who did apparel and was like, hey, do you mind sharing your vendor with me? Like what were some downsides of this vendor? What could you do? What could you not do? And eventually I found a vendor that you could pick, different color blocking for different parts of the piece. You could kind of customize the piece a little bit and like pick different aspects of it that you wanted to be changed. Um, and then I was like, okay, let's go. And I feel like I feel like for the vendor, I was probably somebody who like really tested the limits of what they could and couldn't do. Because I
Right.
was just like, yeah, I want all of these different colors for the hoodie. I want this extra detail of this almost like layered effect on the shirt where there's like a little purple bit of fabric at the bottom of the shirt and around the collar. And it looks like you're wearing two shirts, like a purple shirt under a black shirt, but it's really just kind of like an extra little like hemmed on piece. And like I just, kept asking the vendor to send me photos of everything so I could see what it looked like, sent me the actual samples
You
at
sound like
Gen
somebody
Con
who
last year.
you know what you want. You know what you want. I mean,
Yeah.
that might be a problem, but not. I mean, the product itself
Yeah.
came out great. You know what I mean?
Thanks.
You
I
want you want that. You want somebody to be like obsessed over the minutia because that's how
Yeah.
good work happens.
Yeah. And it's been one of those things too where like after, because I'm completely finished with the Kickstarter now. Like a couple of months ago, I shipped out the last of the Kickstarter rewards. It took me like 3 weeks of like downloading all the spreadsheets for all the orders, figuring out how to transfer them over into ShipStation, which I use for my online store, getting that right, and then double checking everything. And then it took me like a week and a half of actually packing up all the orders
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
myself and just doing like 10 to 20 a day and taking those over to the post office each day and sending those out. And finally I finished it. And like you always hear horror stories with Kickstarters where you're like, oh, something happened with shipping and shipping was more expensive than I planned, or stuff got shipped back to me and it didn't get to the people that got it, or it shows up and it's damaged, it's messed up, or they get the product and the product itself is damaged. And I have had none of that. Like, I've only had people who supported it tell me that they love the hoodies, that they're super great quality. I haven't had anybody say like there was a problem with their hoodie or shirt. I haven't had anybody complain of any defects. And I'm just like, what is happening? Because there's part of me that's like still in disbelief on that. Like, because in other projects, I've had people like email me like, oh, I got this thing, it's slightly damaged, can I get a replacement? And usually that's like, a much smaller pool of orders that's coming from, whereas this was like 170 orders and I haven't had anybody message me yet.
Congratulations. I mean, it's impressive that anybody who can kickstart like that blows my mind. If people who successfully fund Kickstarter campaigns, I'm like I'm in awe, because like
Thanks.
that is not just like being a good business person and having product that people are interested in, but like people like you. It's like it's something that is alien to me.
Yeah. As I like to joke, I have walking or I have resting, ask me for directions face.
You are
Um,
like you do, yeah. I have the kind of face where people come up to me and they're like, "Are you angry?" And I'm like, "I'm just thinking. This is the shape of my forehead. I'm not angry. I'm just thinking."
Like there have been so many times where I've been at a convention in another state, in a city I've never been in, and I'm walking around and somebody will just come up and be like, "Hey man, do you know where this street is?" And like the number of times that I've been like, "I'm not from here, but I'll pull my phone out and Google it for you."
You have a friendly face. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Um,
So I think that definitely helps.
yeah, if well, you have a strong like my strong brow makes people just go. "Mm."
I also wear bright colors like this. Like, how terrifying and intimidating could I be when I'm decked out in all pink?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. Maybe I should start wearing all pink and see what happens,
Yeah.
and I'll just
And
maybe people.
I'm pretty short. I'm 5'4", so it's like you're coming up to a little pink little hobbit and you're just like, hey man, do you know where this is?
Yeah, I'm 6 feet, so I'd be like, maybe people would just look at me and be like, okay, that person's clearly insane. We need to just like he's 6 feet tall. Like I'd look like a giant. I don't know, like salmon. Or I don't know, like maybe something an angry piece of giant salmon or something. Who knows? But this has been great. So before I let you go, is there anything like give the audience information on where they can go to get your work, get stuff, maybe talk to you about possibly doing commissions for really cool jackets, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So first off, you can find me as Schmandrew Art everywhere on the internet. That's SCHM Andrew Art. And my website is schmandrewart.com. It has personal work, commercial work. It also has my online shop, which I'm about to do a huge update on May 8th, adding
Mhm.
desk mats, which I haven't ever had on the store before. I'm putting my new token packs up on the store that are brand new that I haven't had online yet. I'm putting tote bags up on my website for the first time ever. I'm going to put some originals up on the site as well.
Ooh.
Yeah, so there's going to be a lot of new stuff, and there's going to be a 20% off promo code. So if you're watching this at the time, definitely go to my Twitter. It'll be the pinned message with the shop update and the link.
And I'll put the info in the schnotes below the
The
video.
schnotes, nice. You understand the branding. And then you can also find me on all social media pretty much as Schmandrew Art. The main ones are TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. I do also have a Kara account. It's like the new Twitter for artists.
Oh, okay,
We'll
because yeah,
see if it takes off. It's in its beta, but I took the name so that nobody else can get the name.
right.
And put some stuff up there. So that's up there. If you want to, if you like my art and you like my story and you want to, throw me a little tip, you can go to Patreon with under Schmandrew Art, and you can get behind the scenes stuff and kind of insight into how I work. You can join my comic tier, which lets you read the comic that I'm working on, the graphic novel. It's something I chip away at in between like freelance and busy seasons. And then there's also a tier for a pin club. So it's $10, and every 4 months I do a new pin, and you get that pin for basically just that $10. Whereas I sell those pins for $20 or more.
They're cool pins.
They're big pins. They're all bigger than 2 inches.
I
So
mean,
they're solid, chunky boys.
I mean, they're very well made. They're very well made. Well, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. I'm glad we finally had a chance to talk.
Yeah, this was really fun. Like, thank you. If you ever want me to come back, I would be happy to come chat.
Oh, totally,
Or
totally,
if you just
totally.
want to play on Spell Table, I'm happy to just jam some games on Spell Table.
That would be absolutely fantastic. And I know my little group will be like, artist is coming. Like they always get excited. An artist is coming. I'm like, yes, I know. Calm down, please. Don't be dorky. Yeah, this has been great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Have a good one.
And before I let you go, we're gonna do the goofy.
Yes.
We're gonna do the goofy Patreon stuff. I'm taking off my jacket because I'm sweating like a whore in church.